I still don't know what the hell I saw that night. It's been a couple years and I've gone over it in my head 100 times and it still doesn't sit right. I bought my house when I was 26, 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet neighborhood. The neighbors on my right are the Harmons, an older couple, probably late 50s. Their house is a 2-story colonial and it sits pretty close to my property line. Their second-floor windows look down into my backyard. I never really thought about that until the night I'm about to tell you about. My 28th birthday fell on a Saturday, and I had a small thing at my place. Maybe 8 people, burgers, hot dogs, a case of Modelo, nothing big. The Harmons had been gone for a few days. I'd seen a hold mail slip in their trash bin earlier that week, so I figured they were out of town. Honestly, I was relieved. One less neighbor to worry about if the music went late. I was setting up in the backyard around 4 in the afternoon when I heard something from the other side of the fence. It sounded like a low voice, maybe a man. Then something that might have been a short laugh, cut off fast. I stood still and listened. Nothing else came. I told myself it was probably someone walking down the street on a phone call, and the fence just carried the sound weird. I went back to setting up. But before I went inside, I latched the gate. I don't know why, I just did. Everyone showed up around 6. We grilled, played music, sat around the deck table playing Cards Against Humanity. It was a good night. Around 10 people started heading out. My friend Marcus stayed until almost 11 to help me clean up, then drove home. I wasn't tired yet, just winding down. I brought the last few things inside, threw out the paper plates, and went back out on the deck for some air. The string lights were still on. It was quiet. A dog was barking somewhere down the street, then it stopped. Then I looked over at the Harmon house. Their second-floor window was lit from inside. Not bright, just a lamp or something. And there was a person standing in the window, centered, arms at their sides, facing my yard, not moving. I froze. I thought it was a reflection at first. Then I thought maybe Tom and Linda had come home early. But the way this person was standing was wrong. If it was Tom or Linda, they would have moved, waved, done something. This person just stood there, and even from that far I could tell they were smiling, just the corners of the mouth looking right at me. I stepped back toward the sliding door and looked again. Same position, still hadn't moved. I tried to tell myself it was the angle or a coat on a hanger, or their son stopping by, and I just didn't see the car. None of it felt right. I went inside and just stood in the kitchen for a minute trying to come up with an explanation. Their son, a house sitter, something. I went to the front window and looked at their driveway. Empty. Porch light off. House looked the same as it had all week. I called Marcus. He was still driving home. I told him what I saw and said I was thinking about calling the non-emergency line. He asked if I was sure I hadn't had one too many and imagined it. I said I didn't know. He told me to look again. I went to the kitchen window. Worse angle, but I could still see part of that second floor. The light was still on, but the figure was gone. Just an empty window. Marcus went through all the same explanations I'd already gone through in my head. By the time 5 minutes passed, I wasn't even sure anymore what I'd seen. I told him I'd keep an eye on it. We hung up. I turned off the kitchen light and walked back toward the living room. I sat down and turned the TV on. I couldn't focus on it. I turned it off. The screen went dark, and in the black of the screen I could see the backyard reflected behind me. The deck, the string lights, the chairs. And then a shape moved across the deck, fast, left to right, there and gone. A person, upright, moving the way a person moves. Not a shadow, not an animal. I turned around and unlocked the slider and stepped outside. I looked left and right down the deck. Nothing. Chairs were where I'd left them. I looked up at the Harmon window. It was empty again. I was about to go back inside, and that's when I noticed something on their bedroom ceiling. A shadow. The lamp was casting it up from somewhere inside the room. The shadow was moving, frantic, like hands tearing something apart, ripping, shaking, destroying. I don't know what it was, but I knew it was wrong. I turned toward the door to go inside and call the cops. Then something crashed on the other side of the fence. loud, metallic. I jumped. The grill tongs were sitting right there next to the grill and I grabbed them. I know how that sounds. They weren't going to help me with anything. I just grabbed them. I walked toward the fence. After the crash, everything went completely silent, not normal quiet, the kind of silence where you can feel someone is standing still on purpose. I got to the fence and crouched down. There's a gap near the bottom between two slats. Some dark fabric was pressed up against it from the other side. I didn't think about it. I stood up. There was another gap at chest height. I hadn't been looking for it. It was just there. I leaned in close and there was an eye on the other side, just one eye looking at me through the gap, close. And then I realized what the fabric at the bottom was. It was a pants leg. He'd been standing there the whole time. I ran. Back door, slider locked, deadbolt, called 911. The dispatcher was calm. I wasn't. She asked me to confirm the address and I told her. She asked if I could still see anyone and I said I didn't know. I hadn't looked since I came inside. She told me to lock the doors and I told her they were already locked. She said to stay on the line. I sat on the floor in the living room with my back against the couch because I didn't want to be near any of the windows. I kept thinking about the slider and whether I'd actually turned the deadbolt or just the handle lock. I'd turned both. I remembered doing it, but I kept going back to it anyway. Cops got there in about 11 minutes. They checked my yard first. Then they went through the Harmon's side gate, which was unlatched. In the Harmon's backyard, their grill was tipped over near the fence. That was the crash I'd heard. They went up to the house. The back door was unlocked. Not broken, not forced, just unlocked. Inside the bedroom, there was a pillow torn apart, feathers all over the bed, the floor, the dresser. Nothing else in the house was touched. Nobody inside. One of the cops told me it was probably just a break-in, and the guy got spooked when he heard me come outside. I nodded, but I didn't really buy it. About 2 weeks later, the Harmons came home. I caught Linda in the driveway and told her what happened. She listened. She said she was sure she'd locked that back door before they left. I asked if their son might have come by. She said no. Then she got quiet. She didn't ask me any follow-up questions. She just nodded and said she was glad I called the police. About 3 months later, I noticed a for sale sign in their yard. I don't know if that's related. There are things that happened when I was a kid that I didn't fully understand until I was an adult. Most of them are pretty mundane. This one is not. I grew up in Sonora, California, small town in the Sierra Nevada foothills, the kind of place where nothing really happens and everybody knows everybody, and the summers feel like they last forever. I was the kind of kid who spent most of his time outside. That was basically the default setting for kids in that town back then. We had huffy bikes and too much free time and not enough supervision, and that combination got me into situations I still think about. My best friend back then was a kid named Danny. I don't know where he is now. We lost touch somewhere in our 20s, which happens. But back then he was basically my shadow. We did everything together, including the stuff we absolutely weren't supposed to do. There was this stretch of gravel road that ran west out of town toward the national forest. Our parents had a pretty clear understanding that we weren't to go that direction on our bikes. How far was too far was never precisely defined, which I think we both interpreted as wiggle room. The road ran past a few residential properties and then turned into packed dirt that wound through the pines toward the river. There were old structures out that way, somewhere past the second creek crossing. Older kids had mentioned them, not in a specific way, more like a passing reference, something about abandoned buildings out there, nobody was really sure what. We'd filed it away the way you file things away at that age, which is to say we thought about it more than we let on. It was a Saturday and we had no plan. We were probably 5 or 6 miles from home, maybe more, when the sky went gray and the wind changed. It had been a normal July morning, dry and hot. The rain came fast, the way it sometimes does in the mountains, like someone flipped a switch. We pulled off the road under a big sugar pine and argued for maybe 30 seconds about what to do. Danny pointed through the trees. There was something visible through the timber, maybe 100 yards off the road. Several structures, low, blocky shapes barely visible through the pines, the color of old concrete. We walked our bikes through the brush and left them leaning against a tree near what had been a parking area at some point. There were maybe 6 or 7 buildings arranged loosely around a central clearing. Squat, single-story, flat-roofed, cinder block, and old brick. The windows that still had glass were opaque with grime. Some had been covered over with plywood from the outside, warped and splitting now. The whole place had been closed for a long time. There was a signpost near the entrance with no sign on it anymore, just the rusted brackets where one had been. Near the edge of the lot there was a rope hanging from a branch of a big pine, not frayed like it had been there for decades, just hanging there. I noticed it and kept walking. The biggest building was on the far side of the clearing, 2 stories, longer than the others, with a row of narrow windows along the upper floor. We went into one of the smaller ones first, through a door that wasn't locked, just stuck from the frame shifting. Inside was dim and smelled like old concrete and something else I couldn't name. Most of the room was empty, metal bed frames stacked against one wall, but in the far corner there was a mattress on the floor that didn't belong, not new but not destroyed either. Someone had put it there within the last few years. Next to it, lined up against the baseboard, were 4 or 5 soup cans. One still had its label. Danny picked one up and turned it over and set it back down. My brain went straight to bum or hunter. People camped illegally in those forests all the time. Finding signs of a squatter in an old building wasn't unusual. I told myself that. I actually said it out loud to Danny. He nodded like he agreed and we headed for the big building. The main entrance was on the ground level, a heavy metal door propped open with a chunk of broken cinder block. Inside was a long corridor running the full length of the building. Concrete floor, brick walls, ceiling maybe 10 feet up. Light came in through the narrow windows on the left side, weak and gray from the overcast. The air was cold for July. Almost immediately on the right, maybe 15 feet from the entrance, there was a door set into the wall. Solid metal, no handle on the corridor side, just a flat face and a hasp with a padlock through it. The padlock wasn't rusted through like everything else. I remember looking at it and thinking that's not old. That's not from 10 years ago. There was a small rectangular opening cut into the door at about eye level. No glass, just an open slot. I leaned in and looked. It took a second for my eyes to adjust. The room inside was small. The walls were covered in marks, groups of 4 lines with a diagonal across them. I knew what those were. Even at that age, I knew what those were. But it was the marks near the bottom of the wall that actually stopped me. They were darker, cleaner edges, not the faded gray of the ones above them. Those looked like they'd been made recently, weeks, not years. I was still looking at them when I noticed something on the floor just inside the door. A mug. Ceramic, dark blue, not dusty, not corroded, just sitting there. I felt something shift in my chest, and then I heard the crash behind me. I spun around. Danny had picked up a loose brick from somewhere and put it straight through one of the corridor windows facing outside. The glass blew outward and the sound cracked through that building like a gunshot. It was so loud I actually grabbed the wall. I said, "What is wrong with you? Are you serious right now?" He kind of shrugged and almost smiled the way he did when he knew he'd done something stupid but wasn't ready to admit it. The sound was still ringing off the concrete walls. I remember standing there thinking about how far that had just carried. I didn't say that part out loud. We kept moving. The corridor ran maybe 60 feet to a T-junction. At the far end where the corridor met the junction, there was a staircase going up along the back wall. Metal railing, concrete steps. We didn't go up. Rooms off both sides, most with open doorways, some with doors hanging at angles on single hinges. We were about halfway down when I stopped. There was moisture on the floor. The concrete was dark in patches, and in one of those patches there were footprints, not old ones, The impressions were defined, the edges were sharp. Someone had walked through here after the rain started. I looked closer. There were 2 sets. One showed a boot sole, the tread pressed clearly into the wet grime. I registered that and moved on to the second set. I actually crouched down because I wasn't sure I was seeing it right. A heel, the ball of a foot, toes, no sole, no tread. A bare foot, pressed into the cold, wet concrete right next to the boot print. I stood back up slowly. I didn't say anything. I couldn't think of a single explanation for that. A bare foot on a cold concrete floor in a locked building in the rain. I looked at Danny. He was staring at the same prints and his face had changed. Neither of us said anything. Then I saw the drag marks. 2 parallel lines in the grime running down the center of the corridor toward the T-junction. They didn't come from the entrance, they came from further inside. We both looked at the junction at the same time. Neither of us moved. The rain on the roof was loud and steady. I think we were both right at the edge of turning around. I could feel it. We were seconds away from making that decision. And then something around that corner fell. One single deep thud. The sound of something dense and heavy dropping onto concrete. Not metal, not furniture. Something with weight to it. We ran. Not together, not toward the exit. Just away, in different directions. The way panic works when there's no plan. I went left through the nearest open doorway and pressed myself against the wall inside. Danny went the other way. The room was small and empty. A single window with no glass looking out at the side of the building. Rain coming in over the sill. I put my back against the wall and tried to breathe quietly. My heart was going so hard I could feel it in my throat. I could hear the rain. I could hear my own breathing. That was it. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that my legs started to shake. At some point I slid down the wall and sat on the floor with my knees up and just stared at the doorway. At some point the light in the doorway changed. Just for a second. Something moved past it in the corridor, close and quick, and then it was gone. I did not turn my head. I don't think I could have made myself do it. Then Danny's voice came from somewhere down the corridor. He said my name twice, low and flat, not screaming, not whispering, just my name the way you'd say it if you needed someone to come but didn't want to make noise. I sat there for a few more seconds and listened to what came after it. Nothing, no struggle, no other voice, just rain. I got up, I went back into the corridor and turned right at the junction. There was a short dead-end passage and at the end of it a metal door, heavy, no window. The bolt bar was seated in the bracket on my side from the outside. I lifted it and pulled the door open. Danny was standing just inside in the dark. He walked past me without a word and I followed him. We moved back up the corridor toward the entrance without talking, stepping carefully, trying not to make noise. We were maybe 20 feet from the exit when something made me flinch. I don't even know what it was. A sound, a shadow, nothing. Just some signal my body sent before my brain could catch up. Danny saw me react and that was it. He bolted. I went right behind him on pure instinct, and we ran out through the entrance and across the clearing to where the bikes were. I got mine free and was already moving when Danny grabbed my shoulder. He wasn't looking at me. I turned around. In one of the upper windows of the main building there was a figure standing behind the glass. Still, not moving. Just a shape behind the dirty glass, facing us. We rode hard. Neither of us said a word. I don't think we slowed down until we were back on the gravel road with the trees thinning out and town somewhere ahead of us in the gray afternoon. That night I sat at dinner and ate whatever my mom had made and listened to my family talk about completely normal things, and I didn't say a word. Not that night, not ever. A few days later, I asked Danny how he'd ended up in that room. He said he ran in there when we split up, and then he couldn't get out. That bolt was on the outside, no way to close it from in there. I've never been able to get past that. My name is Ryan. This happened when I was somewhere around 39, 40, right in that stretch. I'd been hiking on and off for about 15 years at that point. Nothing extreme, just standard backcountry trips a few times a year with a couple of buddies. And there was this route in Pisgah National Forest that my friend Derek and I had been talking about doing for almost 2 years. Derek moved to Denver in the spring and the trip just kind of died on its own. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one evening looking at a trail guide I'd bought and never used and thinking, just go. I'd never done a solo overnight before, not once in 15 years. I came back with a broken finger, and about 2 hours of that weekend I still can't account for. The weekend, packed my gear, and drove out on a Friday morning. The drive from Charlotte is about 2.5 hours, maybe a little more depending on where you exit. I got to the trailhead parking area around 9:30. There were 2 other cars there when I pulled in. By the time I finished lacing my boots and adjusting my pack, one of them was gone. I remember noticing the other one and thinking that was fine. Meant I probably wasn't completely alone out there. Later I thought about that a lot. The trail going in was well marked and easy to follow for the first couple of miles. Then it narrowed as I pushed further back from the main corridor. Pisgah is big enough that if you walk more than a few miles off the popular loops, you can go most of a day without seeing anyone. That was the whole point. I covered about 6 miles the first day and found a campsite near a small creek that came down off the ridge on my left. Flat ground, good tree cover, soft enough soil that my tent stakes went in clean. I set up camp around 4:30, gathered some wood, and had a fire going before it got dark. I keep my car keys in my front pants pocket when I hike, always. I learned that the hard way on a trip maybe 10 years before this one, when I dug through a fully packed bag for 20 minutes in the dark looking for them. After that, it became a rule. Keys stay on my body, not in the pack. That first night was exactly what I needed. I ate some pasta out of a bag, sat by the fire, and just did nothing. At some point, I found myself thinking about Derek. Specifically that Derek was definitely at home in Denver right now, probably watching TV in an apartment, and I was here alone in the mountains in October by choice. And honestly, good. His loss, I slept well, better than I had in months. The second morning I woke up early and ate breakfast at camp. The plan had been to push further north that day, find a better spot a few miles out, and loop back toward the trailhead on day 3. My current site was fine, but it was closer to the main corridor than I wanted. Before I broke camp and committed to hauling everything, I wanted to go up to the ridge, get a look at the landscape ahead, check the terrain, see if the direction made sense. So I left the camp set up, grabbed my day pack and binoculars and headed up. The water bottle I'd been using that morning was almost empty, so I swapped it for a fresh one. The weather was good, partly cloudy, almost no wind. The kind of fall day in the mountains where everything looks like someone adjusted the contrast. I made it up to the ridge in about 20 minutes and found a flat rock that jutted out over a small overlook. I ate a granola bar and looked out at the ridgeline across the valley. The forest below was thick, mostly mixed hardwood starting to turn, yellows and reds. It was quiet, the good kind of quiet that you only get far enough from roads. I pulled out the binoculars. I bring them every trip, mostly for birds, but also just to look around, and swept them across the valley. That's when I saw the 2 men. They were a long way down, maybe 300 yards, possibly more, in a narrow clearing between 2 sections of forest. One man had his back flat against a tree, arms down at his sides, not braced against it, not leaning, just pressed against it. The second man was standing maybe 15 feet away, facing him. Neither of them was moving. I watched for probably 30 seconds trying to figure out what I was seeing. They weren't fighting. They weren't talking. Nothing about their posture suggested conversation. They weren't resting. They were just standing there in that arrangement, completely still. I was still working through it when someone said, "Hey there," from about 5 feet behind me. I yelled. Not a word, just a sound. Pure reflex. I spun around and there was an older man standing on the trail, maybe late 60s, wearing a blue canvas shirt and carrying hiking poles. He looked startled by my reaction and immediately put his hands up a little, half laughing, apologizing. Said he should have made more noise coming up on me. He was friendly, the type of guy who needs an audience more than a destination. Just started talking, how far I'd come in, where I was headed, whether I'd seen the waterfall off the South Fork yet. I was still half turned toward the valley but trying to be polite. While he talked, he had this habit of running his thumb back and forth across the top of his hiking pole grip. Not nervously, just constantly, like something he did without thinking. The kind of thing you notice and then can't stop noticing. At some point he asked if I was out here alone and I said yes without thinking about it. He nodded. Then he said, "Just you? Nobody's coming out later or anything?" I told him no, just me the whole weekend. He nodded again like that was the answer he expected and kept talking. A few minutes later he asked my name. I told him. He nodded. I raised the binoculars while he was talking just to check. The two men were still there, but now they were both looking up in my direction. Both of them. Arms at their sides, faces turned up toward the ridgeline where I was standing. I couldn't make out features at that distance, but they weren't looking at the tree line or the sky. They were looking at me. I don't even remember what the old man was saying at that point. His voice turned into noise. He touched my arm lightly to get my attention back. Said something about a shelter 2 miles north I might want to check out. I raised the binoculars one more time a few minutes later. The clearing was empty. They were gone. I told myself the most boring version. Two guys doing something I didn't understand because I didn't have context. Maybe they were bird watching. Maybe it was some kind of game. The valley is big. I was far away. I probably misread the whole thing through glass at 300 yards. People can look still without being still. It was nothing. The old man was still talking. I wasn't really listening anymore. I was looking at that clearing, turning over every explanation I could think of, and none of them quite fit. At some point he said something and paused like he was waiting for a response. I just nodded. Eventually he said he'd better get moving, wished me a good trip. I barely registered it. As he turned to leave, he called back over his shoulder, "Enjoy the rest of your night out there." I was still staring at the valley. I didn't think about it at all. The camp was about a quarter mile back down the ridge. I started down the trail, still thinking about what I'd seen, still turning it over and not landing anywhere that felt settled. The camp looked normal when I came back to it. At first glance, completely normal. I set my day pack down next to my main pack against a tree and sat down on the log I'd been using as a bench the night before. Then I noticed my water bottle, the one I'd left at camp, was on the wrong side of the log. I'd set it down on my left before heading up, and now it was on the right. I looked at it for a second and moved on. I went to get my stove set up and noticed my folding chair was open. I'd left it folded and leaned against the tree next to my pack. Now it was fully open, like someone had just stood up from it. I stood there looking at it. I needed it to be the chair, because the alternative, that someone had been sitting in my camp while I was gone, was something I wasn't ready to hold on to yet. So I told myself I'd probably just forgotten to fold it. I'd been thinking about the route when I left, not paying attention to every single thing. Possible, barely, but possible. I sat back down, ate a snack, watched the afternoon light move through the trees, tried to let the quiet do what it had done the day before. It didn't quite work. 20 minutes later, I got up to grab something from my kit bag and found that my headlamp was lying on the ground next to the bag instead of inside it. I specifically remembered zipping that bag. I always zip it because the last thing you want is to reach in at midnight and find your headlamp missing. I stood there holding it and felt something tighten in my chest. I looked at the tent. The zipper wasn't open, but it wasn't fully closed either. There was a gap at the very bottom of maybe 2 centimeters, maybe less. The kind of gap you might not notice unless you were looking for it. I always close my tent to the last tooth every time. It's the kind of habit that isn't even conscious anymore. Undo it, zip it all the way, move on. 15 years. Not once had I left even a crack. I walked over and pulled the opening wider and looked inside. Everything was where I left it. Sleeping bag, dry bag, both boots tucked against the sidewall. I exhaled. crouched down to check the boot situation. I always shake them out before putting them on, even inside a tent. That's when I noticed the sleeping bag wasn't lying flat. There was something inside it. A small shape about 2/3 down, near where your knees would be. I unzipped the bag. It was a small bundle of dried plants, stems tied with what looked like a piece of thin cord. Some of the leaves had fallen off and scattered inside the bag. I had no idea what kind of plants they were. Not wildflowers, nothing I recognized. Just a bundle of dried stems with a few brown leaves clinging to them, maybe 4 inches long. I sat back on my heels and just held it. My hands weren't shaking, but something in my chest had gone very still in a way that felt worse than shaking. Then I walked it to the edge of camp and threw it into the trees. I didn't want it near me, but the feeling it left didn't go anywhere. I tried to run the whole day back in order. The 2 men in the valley, standing completely still, both turning to look up at me at the same time. The old man appearing out of nowhere on a quiet ridge, asking if I was alone, asking whether anyone was coming to meet me, asking my name. And now this. The chair, the headlamp, the tent, the thing in my sleeping bag that I'd just thrown into the woods. None of it connected to a story I was comfortable with, and part of me still wanted to stay. That was the original plan. One more night, loop back tomorrow. The weather was holding, I had food. I couldn't find a way to stack all of these things on top of each other and come out relaxed. Each one alone, fine. All of them together on the same afternoon in a camp I'd left for maybe 2 hours. Not fine. I made the decision. Pack up, get back to the trailhead, drive home. I started breaking down camp. Tent down, stuff sacked, sleeping bag rolled and compressed. Both packs consolidated. I clipped the day pack to the outside of the main one so I was carrying everything on my back. It felt okay, moving, having a direction. I told myself I was being smart. Derek would have left 3 hours ago, but whatever. The camp was almost fully packed when I heard the first cough. It came from the trees to my left. One low, unhurried cough. The kind of sound a person makes when they want you to know they're there. I stopped moving, stood completely still. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. Not a rustle, not a step, not a word. I waited maybe 20 seconds and heard nothing else. I told myself I'd probably just been wound up from the afternoon and my brain was turning every random sound into something it wasn't. I went back to finishing the pack, but my hands were faster. I hoisted everything onto my back and started moving toward the trail. The light was already flattening out the way it does in October under tree cover. That gray before dark that happens faster than you expect at elevation. After a while, the trail got genuinely dark. Not dim, dark. I reached into my pack for my headlamp and clicked it on. Nothing. I clicked it again. Unscrewed the battery cap and tilted it toward what little sky came through the canopy. Empty. I'd used that headlamp the night before. The batteries had been fine. I had a spare set somewhere in my kit bag, but I wasn't sure they were still there, and I wasn't going to stop and dig through the pack in the dark to find out. Then a second cough, right behind me, close enough that I didn't think, I just ran. Pack slamming against my back with every stride, one hand out for branches, moving as fast as I could read the trail in the dark. After maybe 30 seconds, I turned my head to look back, kept my eyes over my shoulder for a few seconds, then something solid at chest height and I was down. I remember the impact, the cold of the ground against my cheek, a weight and close to my ear a sound I still can't name. Not a voice, not quite. After that there's nothing, a gap. Complete and clean. The next thing I remember is gravel under my boots and my car directly in front of me. I was already in the parking lot. I don't know how I got there. I don't know how much time passed. I got in, locked the doors, and drove. I was maybe 15 minutes down the mountain road when the pain detonated in my left hand. I'd reached to adjust my grip on the wheel. Pinky finger, the kind of pain that whites out your vision for a second. I pulled over, turned on the dome light, looked at it. The finger was wrong, bent at an angle that fingers don't bend. It was only sitting there on the shoulder that I realized I had no pack. I was wearing my jacket, my pants, my boots. That was it. No gear, gone. I have no memory of dropping it or putting it down or any of it. The last thing I remembered was running. I drove to the first gas station I could find, asked for ice. The guy behind the counter gave me a bag meant for the coolers out front. I sat in my car in that lot with ice on my hand. Outside the window it was just darkness and the tree line at the edge of the lot, and I sat there staring at it. That's when the old man's last words came back to me, what he'd said as he walked away from the ridge. I'd been staring at an empty clearing when he said it, hadn't given it a second thought. Enjoy the rest of your night out there. I drove to the nearest emergency room. Broken finger, confirmed. They asked how it happened and I said I fell on a trail. I filed a report with the local ranger station a few days later, gave them everything. The trailhead, the campsite location, the description of the old man, the 2 figures in the valley, the bundle of dried plants I'd found in my sleeping bag and thrown into the trees. They took it down, said they'd look into it. A few weeks later, someone called me back and told me they'd checked the area. No signs of disturbance at the campsite, no pack, nothing left behind. My missing gear wasn't there. I don't know what I expected. I've been keeping this one bottled up for quite a while now. Back when this happened, I was 21, maybe 22. I was the kind of guy who did things just to see what would happen. I trained jiu-jitsu and a little bit of wrestling back then, nothing serious, just enough to feel like I could handle myself. And I had this thing about being in places where nobody else was. Not in a weird way, I just liked the quiet. Trails with actual foot traffic annoyed me. I always went further, always found the version of a place that nobody bothered with. That was the whole point. This was somewhere in northwestern Pennsylvania, national forest land. I really wish I could remember the exact name of the place, but I genuinely can't. I'd found the trailhead off a Forest Service road on a paper map, and this was early 2000s, no apps, no GPS on your phone, and honestly I wasn't really in the habit of carrying a phone with me out there anyway. I'd been there once before and seen exactly 0 people. That's why I went back. I should have thought more about why it was always empty. My car was the only one in the lot when I pulled in. It was a weekday in late October, overcast, not raining, but the kind of sky that looks like it's thinking about it. I had a day pack, water, some food. There was no marked trail where I was going. I had a rough idea of the terrain from the last time. The parking area sat low and the forest climbed steeply to the north, and I was planning to push up the ridge, follow it east for a few hours, then loop back down before dark. Simple enough. I hopped a small stream right at the start without breaking stride, barely noticed it. The slope kicked up pretty fast after that. The trees were dense, second growth hardwood mostly, some hemlock, and the canopy had already dropped most of its leaves. Everything was brown and gray and damp. I remember thinking it looked like a place that didn't want to be looked at. I was in a good mood though. That was the thing. I was happy to be out there. I'd been walking maybe 45 minutes when I found the first one. It was maybe 30 feet off to my left and I almost missed it. A hole in the ground, roughly circular, maybe 4 feet across and probably 3 feet deep. The dirt around the edges was dark and looked fresh, not dried out, not grown over like it had been dug recently. The sides were pretty clean, not crumbling or eroded the way you'd get from a tree root pulling up or from runoff. I stood there for a minute looking at it. The explanation I landed on was geology, like a sinkhole or some kind of underground pocket that gave way. That happens in forested areas sometimes. I was pretty sure I'd read something about it at some point, something about how water moves under the surface and creates these voids that eventually collapse. I couldn't remember where I'd read that or if I was even remembering it correctly, but I held onto it anyway because it was the only thing that made sense. The ground does weird things. That was basically my conclusion and I was going with it. I talked myself into it pretty quickly, which I think says more about how much I wanted to keep going than about how convincing the explanation actually was. I kept walking. but I kept thinking about how clean the edges were. That part didn't fit the sinkhole thing. I didn't let myself finish that thought. Another 20 minutes or so up the ridge, I found the second one. Same shape, same depth, same dark, fresh dirt around the rim. I stopped immediately this time. Two identical holes, same elevation on the same ridge, maybe a quarter mile apart. That was not geology. I knew that looking at it. I didn't want to know it, but I knew it. I looked around, and that's when I noticed the tree. Right next to the hole at eye level, there was a cut in the bark. Clean, deliberate, maybe 4 inches long. Not a blaze mark from a trail. Those are higher and standardized. This was lower, angled, and the wood underneath was still pale, fresh. Okay, I thought. Hunters. Somebody marking territory, setting a line, doing something I didn't understand because I'm not a hunter. People do things in the woods that look strange to someone who doesn't know the context, and I genuinely didn't know the context. I'd never hunted a day in my life. For all I knew, cutting bark like that at eye level was completely standard, some way of marking a property line or a game trail or whatever. That was my explanation, and I was going with it, and the more I repeated it to myself, the more reasonable it sounded. But I noticed I was moving differently now. Quieter. I was placing my feet more carefully without deciding to. My body was doing something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I kept going north along the ridge. I told myself I was fine. I told myself that a few more times than I needed to. The third hole stopped me cold. Same dimensions, same fresh dirt, but this one was different when I got close. The soil at the bottom was uneven, one side of it packed down flat and hard in a way the rest wasn't, like something had stood there at the bottom repeatedly, not a single visit, but multiple. And the ground right at the rim on that same side was compacted too, worn down compared to the surrounding dirt, like whoever it was had been climbing in and out of the same spot over and over. I crouched down and looked closer. There was stuff at the bottom. A length of rope, old and frayed, coiled loosely, and next to it a piece of fabric, dark and torn. I couldn't tell you what it had been, a shirt maybe, or a bag, just a scrap. I sat there staring at it for a while, trying to make it fit something reasonable. My first thought was that it was some kind of marker, like hunters or surveyors leave things in the ground sometimes to mark locations. But the rope was worn through in places, frayed in a way that takes a long time, and the fabric wasn't folded or stored, it was just there like it had been dropped or left, not placed. That wasn't a cache. I knew that. Whatever story I was trying to tell myself about hunters or survivalists, it didn't cover rotted rope in a hole with packed dirt at the bottom where something had been standing. A lot. I think about that moment more than any other part of this. I was standing right there with every reason to leave and no good reason to stay. I knew something was wrong, not suspected, knew, and I just didn't go. I still don't fully understand why. I was still crouched at the third hole just looking at it when I straightened up and scanned the trees around me. That's when I noticed the fourth one. It was right there, maybe a few meters away, barely visible through the low brush, easy to miss. There were branches laid across the top of it, loose but deliberate, placed and not fallen. I didn't move toward it right away. I don't know why. Something made me look back down at the third hole instead. There was something at the bottom I hadn't registered the first time. A shape against the far wall, low, darker than the surrounding dirt. I'm not sure what it was. I don't remember clearly. That whole sequence is pretty patchy for obvious reasons. I crouched back down and leaned over the edge to try to get a better look. A few seconds passed, maybe less than that. Then I heard a sharp crack behind me, loud and close, and my body registered it before my brain did. I felt something hit me hard and flat in the center of my back, and then the ground was just gone. I don't know how to explain what happened in the air except to say my body did something my brain didn't order. Years of grappling, I guess. I'd been thrown enough times that somewhere in the muscle memory there was an instruction that said tuck the head, and I didn't think it just happened. I went in sideways, shoulder and ribs taking most of it, not my skull. The landing was still brutal. What came after that is blurry in a way I have trouble describing. It wasn't unconsciousness exactly, more like the volume got turned down on everything for a few seconds. I was on my side on the dirt and I couldn't tell you how much time passed. I think I might have gone out for a moment. I'm genuinely not sure. There's a gap I can't account for. When things started coming back, I looked up and I'm pretty sure there was a shape at the top of the hole, standing right at the edge, not leaning over, not saying anything, just standing there. I can't swear to it because everything was still swimming, but that image is in my head and it doesn't feel like something I invented. Then it was gone, or I lost the thread again, I don't know which. By the time I was fully present, I was alone at the bottom of the hole. I looked up and yelled. It started as something like hey or help and turned into something uglier pretty fast. I was scared, and 21 and scared 21-year-olds get loud and stupid. I started swearing, threatened things I had no ability to back up, and the words just bounced off the dirt walls and went nowhere. And then I heard footsteps. Not moving away, but moving around. Slow, deliberate circles around the rim above me. I shut up. I couldn't see anything up there, just the gray circle of sky and the bare branch edges. The footsteps kept going, and then branches started appearing across the opening, being laid across it from the outside one by one, not dropped in but placed, and the gray light got dimmer, and then it was just dark. I heard the footsteps move away after that, slow, unhurried, like there was no reason to rush, and then nothing. I lay there in the dark and just listened. I was trying to hear anything, footsteps coming back, voices, anything that would tell me what was happening up there or how far away they were. But there was nothing. Complete silence, the kind you only get deep in the woods when even the wind stops. I kept thinking that if I could just hear something, I could figure out what to do, but there was nothing to hear and nothing to figure out. I have no idea how long I sat there before I moved. Time had completely stopped making sense. I felt along the walls with both hands. The dirt was packed but not uniform, and on the north side, maybe 2 feet up, I found a root, thumb thick. I pulled on it and it held. I jumped, caught it, and started pulling myself up. My knees scrambled against the wall and the dirt kept crumbling under my feet and I nearly dropped twice. My shoulder from the fall was screaming at me the whole time, but the root held and I kept moving, and then my forearms were over the edge and I pushed up through the branches. They were light and they scattered and I dragged myself out onto the ground. I got to my feet fast, maybe 30 seconds after getting out, maybe less. I stood there and listened for a moment. Wind, nothing else, no footsteps, and then I ran. Not jogging, I actually ran. Full sprint through the trees with no direction, just away from that spot. Branches catching my arms, footing uneven, not caring. I ran until my lungs made me stop, and then I walked fast with my head turning every few seconds because the whole time there was this feeling at my back, not a sound exactly, just the absolute certainty that something was behind me. I'd slow down and the forest would be quiet and I'd almost convince myself I was alone, and then a crack somewhere in the trees, a branch or a footstep, I couldn't tell, and I'd be running again. That happened 3 or 4 times at least, maybe more, I lost count. Somewhere in all of that it got dark, not gradually the way it usually does when you're paying attention. One moment there was gray light through the canopy, and then there just wasn't. I didn't notice it happen. I was moving downhill by then, which felt right without me deciding it. And then I heard water. I found the stream and I followed it down. That was the whole strategy. That was it. The stream led me out. I came out in the dark. Deep night, no moon worth mentioning, just the black tree line and then the gravel of the parking area crunching under my feet. My car was alone in the lot. I got in, locked the door, and sat there with my hands on the wheel, watching the gap in the trees where the trail started. It was just darkness in there, nothing moving. I sat maybe 2 or 3 minutes, then I drove. I drove home and didn't say anything to anybody for a while. I thought about calling the police a few times. I'd pick up the phone and put it down because I couldn't figure out how to tell it. I went into an unmarked section of forest alone and got pushed into a hole by someone I never clearly saw. I knew how that sounded. There was no way to say it that didn't make me sound like I'd imagined it or asked for it. I told one person eventually, maybe a year later. He believed me enough not to laugh, which was the best I was going to get. I stopped bringing it up after that. The thing I think about sometimes, and I try not to let myself think about it all the way, is the fourth hole. The one with the branches across the top. I completely forgot about it after I fell. Between the impact and the dark and getting out, it just dropped out of my head entirely. I didn't remember it until I was home, standing in my kitchen, and it just came up out of nowhere. I've never gone back. I want to say up front that what I'm about to describe changed the way I moved through the world. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, permanent way. My daughter turned 6 in July. That's where this starts. We did it right. The whole backyard thing, string lights along the fence, one of those inflatable sprinkler arches the kids could run through. About 20 people, neighbors, families from her preschool, a couple of my wife's co-workers I'd met once at holiday parties and barely remembered. My daughter was in the middle of all of it, the way she always is, running through the sprinkler, shrieking, completely in her element. She'd brought her stuffed rabbit, gray, floppy ears, left one missing since a friend's lab got hold of it last spring. She carries it everywhere. Him I noticed right away. He was standing near the far end of the yard, by the wooden fence where the property ends and the tree line starts. Dark t-shirt, jeans. He was holding one of the plastic cups we'd set out by the drink table. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't watching the kids. He was just standing there, facing forward. I figured he was one of my wife's co-workers, someone I hadn't been introduced to yet. I told myself I'd go say hello in a few minutes, and then someone handed me a plate and I got pulled into a conversation, and that was it. 40 minutes passed, maybe more. I was helping a kid fish a water balloon out of the garden bed when I happened to look up toward the fence. He was still there. Same spot, same posture. The cup was still in his hand. Hadn't drifted toward the food, hadn't found someone to talk to, hadn't done any of the things people do at parties when they don't know many guests. He was just standing there holding a cup he hadn't drunk from. I found my wife and asked her quietly who the guy by the fence was. She looked over, said she didn't know him, thought he'd come with someone from my side. I told her I'd assumed the same thing about her side. We both looked at him for a moment. He was looking at the yard, at the kids. She said it's probably fine, someone brought him, and I nodded because that made sense. It made sense then. That was the second time I decided not to walk over there. About 20 minutes after that, one of the girls ran up to him out of nowhere. The way kids do, no reason. She just went over and talked to him. I was standing near the porch, probably 40 feet away. I couldn't hear anything. He crouched down to her level. They exchanged a few words. She ran back toward the sprinkler. He stood up and looked directly at me, not toward me, not in my general direction, at me, across the whole yard, like he'd known exactly where I was standing. I started walking toward him. I didn't decide to, my body just did it. I was maybe 15 feet away when one of the dads called out my name, asking me to come settle some argument. 1 second, maybe 2. When I looked back, he was gone. The side gate was open. I always keep that gate latched, always. I walked over and looked out onto the street. Empty, just the sidewalk and the neighbors' cars and the sound of kids behind me. I latched the gate. I told myself he'd left early. People do that. I told myself a lot of things for the rest of that afternoon, and I almost believed most of them. The party wound down around 6. I started breaking down the tables. There was a girl who'd stayed late with her parents. I called her over and asked what the man by the fence had said to her. She thought about it for a second. He asked which one was the birthday girl, she said, like it was nothing. I stood there holding a garbage bag. He didn't know which one she was when he arrived. He came first. Then he found out why. I walked to the far end of the yard to reach the timer on the fence post. That's when I saw it. I almost walked past it. A gift bag, pink, with tissue paper folded over the top, sitting on one of the kids' plastic chairs against the fence. All the presents had gone on the table by the porch. Nobody had any reason to bring a gift bag to the back corner of the yard. I reached in. A rabbit, gray floppy ears, new. One ear had been removed, not sewn back, just closed off. Thick thread, uneven stitches, enough to keep the stuffing in, nothing more. Nobody who knew her would give her this, and nobody who didn't know her would know too. I brought it inside and showed my wife. She put her hand over her mouth and didn't say anything for a long time. I told her it was going to be fine. I don't know if I believed that. I called the police. 2 officers came, walked the perimeter, checked the gate. They told me no crime had been committed. A man standing at a party, a gift bag, nothing they could act on. Open case. Someone would follow up. I knew before they left that nobody would call. I put cameras on the back fence, started taking my daughter to the park 2 miles away instead of the backyard. Open space, more people, easier to see who was there. I sat on the bench closest to the play structure, weeks of nothing. Then I got home one Thursday and found an envelope in the mailbox, no stamp, no return address, just our address on a printed label. Inside was one photograph, 4x6, my daughter and me at the park. She was coming down the slide laughing. I was on the bench maybe 15 feet behind her, turned slightly to the side, not looking in the direction the photo was taken from. The angle was close, not a zoom, 8, maybe 10 feet from where she came off the slide. I had been 15 feet away. I had been watching the parking lot and the tree line and the other adults. I had been doing everything right, and he had been 10 feet from her and I had not seen him at all. I put my wife and daughter on a flight to my mother-in-law's in Arizona. My wife didn't argue. She'd been thinking the same thing since the night I showed her the rabbit. The house goes on the market Friday. I've never told this story. There's a reason. I had something to hide back then, something that would have ended my career. So when all this happened, I kept quiet. I've been living with that choice ever since. This happened when I was about 2 years into the job. I was working out of a station in the Phoenix area, middle of summer. By the time this call came through, it was early afternoon and we'd already run 2 others before it. My partner that day, I'll call him Derek, had been on the job about 6 years longer than me. We weren't close, not unfriendly either. We just knew each other's rhythms after enough shifts. The call came in as a possible heat thing. Male, mid-50s in the backyard, awake and talking. I remember reading it and thinking, 3rd one today. Grabbed my bag and didn't really think about it. I should have. We pulled up around 1 in the afternoon. Single-story house, the kind you see everywhere out there. We went around the side to the backyard. The wife met us at the gate, apron on, hands folded in front of her. She said her husband had been out there maybe 20 minutes, that he sat down and then just went over. Her voice was flat, calm. I'd seen that before. People in shock sometimes go very still. I didn't read into it. A younger man stood a few feet behind her. Her son, I figured. Neither of them moved toward the patient. A man was lying near the middle of the yard. No towel under his head, no water, no shade. The wife was standing near the patio table, not next to him, keeping her distance. I don't know why I looked to the right before going to the patient. I just did. There was another man off to the right near the back fence, standing with his hands at his sides, not in his pockets, not crossed, just hanging straight down. He didn't move toward us, didn't ask if we needed anything, didn't say a word. He was looking at the wife, then at Derek, then at me, not at the guy on the ground. I figured he was a neighbor and moved to the patient. I pulled on gloves and knelt down. He was out cold. Skin was warm and dry, which fit the heat story, but his breathing was wrong, too shallow. Something made me reach for the little device we use to check blood sugar, just a feeling I'd learned not to ignore. The number stopped me. I've worked enough calls to know what heat looks like. This wasn't heat. His sugar was so low he should have been seizing. I opened the bag. We'd used up the sugar shot on the second call that morning. I knew that. I was looking for the backup. There's always a backup. There wasn't. The wife said something behind me. He just needed water. He just needed to rest. This happens sometimes in the heat. Her voice had something in it I didn't have time to figure out. Then something pressed into my hand from the side. Derek had moved next to me without me hearing him. He wasn't even looking at me. He was already turned toward the family, asking the son how long his dad had been out there, what he ate that morning, if anything happened before he sat down. His voice was a little too loud. At one point, the son took a step toward me. Derek put a hand on his shoulder, turned him back, asked him what time his dad got up that day. The son answered. I thought he was crowding the scene. I looked back down at the patient. Then I don't know why I looked up right then. I just did. Her hands were already in the pocket of her apron, both of them, moving fast. She was watching Derek, not me. She didn't know I'd turned around. I looked back down, told myself it was nothing. But what Derek had pressed into my hand was an emergency sugar kit. His. From his jacket pocket, I found out later, not from the rig. It wasn't exactly the right thing to use first by the book, but the right thing was gone, and he was going. I made the call in about 2 seconds. If it went wrong, I'd answer for it. I'd rather answer for trying. I gave it to him and went back to work. It started working, not all the way, but enough. After a couple minutes, his eyes opened a little, didn't focus on anything, then closed again. He needed a hospital. We got him on the stretcher. As we were lifting him, I looked up. The man at the fence was looking at the wife, and she was looking at him. He shook his head once. Left, right, just barely. The kind of shake you'd miss if you weren't looking right at it. The kind that means no. That means it didn't go the way it was supposed to. The wife went still. Her hand stopped moving in the apron pocket. I looked back down at the stretcher. We loaded him and went. Somewhere on the way to the hospital, he opened his eyes, didn't know where he was. The hospital confirmed his blood sugar had crashed. The doctor said another 20 minutes and we'd have been bringing in a body. I filed my report that evening, flagged the missing supply. There was an investigation, internal short. The log showed the previous shift had restocked, signed and dated. Nobody could explain it. Closed inside a week. I kept thinking about that head shake, about the wife's hands in her apron, about the call sheet saying awake and talking when the guy was out cold by the time we got there, about a neighbor who never looked at the guy on the ground. 4 days later, Derek handed in his notice without explanation. I found out later he'd carried that personal sugar kit since his second year on the job. Someone said his father had been sick for a long time. A couple weeks went by, I couldn't shake it. A nurse I knew at the receiving hospital pulled the file for me. No history of diabetes. I asked her to check again. No, so how does a guy with no history of diabetes end up with sugar that low in his own backyard? A couple weeks later, I was in that part of town with a new partner. I asked him to swing by the street, said I just wanted to check something. We pulled up across from the house and parked. The driveway was empty. The blinds were closed. My partner said something to me. I turned to answer. When I looked back at the house, the wife was standing in the front yard. Not in the window. In the yard. Same apron, looking right at the rig. I don't know how she got out there that fast. She wasn't moving, just standing there looking at us. That was the moment it hit me that I'd messed up. If I was going to look into these people, I should have done it quietly, on my own time, not pulled up in a marked vehicle in broad daylight. I just told her I hadn't let it go. I told my partner to drive. That night, I made the worst decision of my life. I told myself I was going to do it right this time, quiet, on foot. Just look at the back of the house, see if there was anything to see, leave. There's a dirt service road that runs behind the houses on that street. A lot of the older neighborhoods out there have them. I parked maybe a quarter mile down and walked in. It was dark, no streetlights back there, just the dirt and the back fences and the sound of my own steps. I counted houses. I had a marker in my head, a tree I'd seen earlier from the rig. I almost made it. Someone hit me from behind. I didn't hear them coming. Hands on my throat, hard, immediately. I went down. I don't remember if I tried to fight back. I don't think I did. Everything got tight and then loud and then far away. The next thing I remember is being on the ground, dirt in my mouth, hearing footsteps moving away from me, fast into the dark, then nothing. I sat up. My hands were shaking. I just wanted to get to my car. I kept looking around the whole way, expecting to see someone, but it was just the dirt road and the fences and the dark. I got to the car, got in, locked the doors, put the key in, turned the headlights on. There was something on the hood. I knew what it was before I could read the label. It was the prescription I take. The exact one, the exact dose, sitting on my hood, lit up by my own headlights. The name on the bottle wasn't my legal name. I have a condition I've never told anyone about at work. Never put it on any form. Never written it down anywhere connected to my job. The name on that bottle is a name only my pharmacy and one other person in my life have ever seen. I sat there in the car for a long time. I don't remember driving home, and I put in my notice the next morning. I moved out of state inside the month. I never went back to that town. I never opened that case again. I had a choice that day. I could have called the cops, made sure someone looked into that house. I didn't. I chose myself. I don't know what happened to that guy after we dropped him at the hospital. I don't know if he went home. I don't know if he's alive. I never checked. I was too scared of what checking would cost me. That's what I can't put down. This was the summer after I turned 23. A buddy of mine, guy named Travis, had a place up in the hills outside of town. Upstate New York, the kind of area where the houses are spaced far apart and the trees come right up to the back fence. He threw a party, maybe a dozen people, nothing crazy, bonfire, cooler, the usual. The property had a pool in the back, and past the fence line, the woods just started, no trail, no signs, just trees. I had no idea that night was about to become the worst 40 minutes of my life. I'd been with Ashley about 8 months at that point. Things were good, not perfect, but good. That night she had a few drinks in her, we both did. And at some point I went inside to help this girl, Katie, find something in one of the back rooms. She was a friend of Travis's, didn't know the house. Took maybe 5 minutes. When I came back out, Ashley was gone. I asked around. My buddy John pulled me aside and said someone had mentioned to Ashley that I was alone in a room with Katie. Whoever said it made it sound like more than it was. John said she got upset. He saw her eyes go red. And then she just walked toward the back fence and didn't stop. Didn't say a word to anyone. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my lighter, I smoked back then, and went after her. My phone was on the kitchen counter. It was one of those Motorola Razrs, the flip kind, and I just hadn't thought to bring it out. I figured I'd be back in 10 minutes. I did not bring a flashlight. The fence gate was unlatched. I pushed through, and the wood swallowed the light from the house almost immediately. Pine trees mostly, packed tight. I flicked the lighter and got maybe 5 feet of orange light in every direction. Past that, nothing. I called her name. No answer. I took maybe 20 steps in and stopped. That's when I noticed something off to my left. And I want to be clear, I didn't think much of it at the time. The grass along the ground was flattened, not like it got rained on, more like a stripe, like something heavy had been dragged through it. I looked at it for a second. Figured it was an animal trail, or maybe someone had hauled some branches through. The ground was soft from rain earlier that week. I kept going. Then I heard it. Ahead and slightly to the right. A soft sound, kind of like crying. Not words, not a voice, just that low, broken sound someone makes when they don't want you to hear them cry. I was sure it was her. I started walking toward it and talking, out loud, into the dark. I explained what happened with Katie. I said there was nothing going on, that she was just looking for something in the closet and I was helping. I said her name. I said, please stop walking. I felt like an idiot talking to the trees, but I kept doing it. The sound didn't stop, it just kept moving. Every time I got close enough to think I was almost there, it was a little farther ahead. I told myself she was doing it on purpose, walking away from my voice because she was pissed, that she'd stop eventually. I didn't notice right away that I couldn't see the lights from the house anymore. When I finally turned around to check, there was nothing behind me but trees. No glow, no party noise, nothing. I felt something drop in my chest. I told myself the woods were just dense enough to block it, that I hadn't gone that far. I turned back around and kept going. That's when the sound stopped. I stood there and called her name again. Silence. Just the wind moving through the branches above me. I started to think maybe she'd looped back. Maybe she was already at the house and I was out here alone for no reason. I decided I'd go a little further and then turn back. Then something moved. Off to my right, maybe 20 feet away. Fast steps and then nothing. I clicked the lighter and held it up. Bushes, a tree, darkness. I stood completely still for 30 seconds. Nothing. I said to myself, "Deer, you're in the woods. It's a deer." I kept going. I'm not sure how much time passed after that. Long enough that I started to feel the cold, which meant I'd been out there a while. I was about to turn around when I heard it. A scream, sharp, female, somewhere ahead. Not a scream like you're scared, like something happened. I didn't process it. I just ran. The trees broke open without warning. I stumbled into a clearing, not large, maybe the size of a living room, where the canopy pulled back and I could see a strip of night sky. I doubled over, catching my breath, and clicked the lighter. There was a jacket on the ground. A woman's jacket. Dark colored. Navy or black. I couldn't tell in that light. I crouched down and looked at it. It wasn't Ashley's. I'd never seen it before. I stood up and looked past the clearing. There was a dirt road on the other side, and on the road there was a truck. Dark, wide body. Something like a pickup. No headlights. Engine. I don't know, I couldn't hear it from where I was. It was just sitting there in the dark. I stared at it for maybe 3 seconds. Then from the direction of the truck, a metal sound. Loud, sudden, like something heavy scraped across the truck bed and dropped. Iron on iron. One sound, then silence. I didn't make a decision. My legs made it for me. I ran. Not back the way I came, not toward the road, sideways into the trees, away from the truck and away from that jacket. The lighter was still in my fist, but I wasn't using it. I just ran blind, branches hitting my face, the ground uneven under my feet, and then I heard someone behind me. Not footsteps, running, heavy, fast. I did not look back. I don't know how long I ran, long enough that my lungs started burning and I didn't slow down anyway. Long enough that I stopped thinking. Then I saw asphalt, a break in the trees, and past it a road, and down the road, headlights coming toward me. I burst out of the tree line and ran straight at the car, waving both arms. Behind me, the crashing through the underbrush stopped. I looked back. A man stood at the edge of the woods, dark clothes. Hoodie pulled up. I couldn't see his face. He wasn't moving. Just standing there at the tree line, watching me. The car slowed. Older couple, man driving, woman in the passenger seat. They were watching me through the windshield the way you'd watch a stranger running at your car at night. The window came down maybe 2 inches. I could see the man's hand hovering near the gear shift. They were a second away from driving off. I could feel it. I held up both hands, empty. I was talking fast. I needed a ride. Someone was behind me, please. The woman said something to the man quietly. He was already shaking his head. I pointed toward the tree line. I said, "There's a man standing right there, look." They looked. Nobody said anything for a second. Then the man in the hoodie stepped back. 1 step, 2, and the darkness took him. Just like that, he was gone. The door unlocked. I got in. The door closed. The car pulled away. I turned and watched through the rear window. The tree line was just black. Nothing moved. The man's name was Harold. I found that out later when he told it to the police officer. His wife was June. They drove me the 15 minutes back to Travis's place, mostly in silence. At some point, June turned halfway around in her seat and looked at me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just looked. I think she already knew the answer. Harold and June stayed when the police came. They told the officer they'd seen the figure too. Man in dark clothing standing at the wood's edge, watching the road. The officers went in with flashlights. They found the clearing, they found tire tracks on the dirt road on the far side, and the flattened strip of grass I'd noticed on the way in. They said it looked like a campsite. Campers maybe, nothing criminal. Ashley was sitting on a wooden bench by the side of the house when I got back. Not at the pool, not inside. Just there, alone, right next to the fence. She'd pushed the gate open, taken a few steps in, and stopped. Too dark. She turned around, sat down on that bench, and stayed there the whole time. She never went more than 10 feet past the gate. What I heard in those woods was not her. I don't know whose it was. The police said campers, but campers don't chase strangers through a dark forest and stop the second a car pulls up. I don't know what I walked into out there. I don't think I want to. I've spent 20 years in the woods. I know what belongs there and what doesn't. What I couldn't figure out after that day is which category I fell into. I'm 43 years old. I've been hunting white-tailed deer since I was in my early 20s, first with my father-in-law, then on my own. I have my Pennsylvania license, my safety certification, everything current. I hunt state game lands up near Clinton County, public land, nothing unusual about that. Thousands of guys do it every November. My rifle is a bolt action .30-06, which is about as standard as it gets for deer season in this state. I've taken probably 60 or 70 deer over the years. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying it so you understand that I don't spook easy, I don't misread situations, and I don't tell stories like this. I hunt alone, always have. My wife stopped asking why a long time ago. It's not about the solitude or anything like that. It's just that I think better out there when it's quiet and there's no one next to me making noise. I know that stretch of forest the way I know my own neighborhood, which trees hold deer in the morning, which draws funnel them east afternoon where the water sources are. I've been working that same area for 11 years. The morning of the incident was a Tuesday, 3rd week of November. I parked at the access road off Route 144 around 5:30 and was in the woods before first light. Temperature was in the low 30s, no wind, good conditions. I had maybe 4 hours before the light started going flat and the deer bedded down. I was maybe 40 minutes into my walk when I noticed the tracks. Not hooves, boot prints. Pressed into a soft patch of ground near a creek crossing I use every season. I crouched and looked at them more carefully. They went in both directions. Not a straight path through, but loops, back and forth, overlapping, like someone had been walking the area in circles, checking something. The edges of the prints were soft and crumbled, rain-blurred. These weren't from today. I stood up and looked around. Nothing, just trees. I told myself it was another hunter scouting the area before the season. Guys do that, walk the land in October, look for sign, figure out where to set up. Made sense. I marked the location in my head and kept moving. About an hour later, I picked up movement in the trees to my northeast. Low, slow. I stopped immediately and glassed it. A deer, young buck, or possibly a doe, hard to say at that angle, maybe 80 yards out, partially screened by a stand of hemlocks. It was moving steadily, not erratically, not the stop and check behavior you usually see, just moving. I started tracking it. This is normal. You don't always get a clean shot where you find them. Sometimes you follow the animal until the terrain opens up and gives you an angle. I've trailed deer for 20 minutes before getting a shot. It's patient work, nothing unusual about it. What was slightly unusual was the way it moved, straight lines, not quite the nervous zigzag pattern of a spooked animal, more like it had somewhere to be. I noted it, filed it away, kept following. I was deeper into the draw than I'd intended to go. I remember thinking that, glancing back, getting a rough sense of distance from the road, further than I'd usually push on a weekday morning. But the deer was still moving and the light was good, so I kept going. That's when I heard the shot. One crack somewhere to my left, or maybe ahead of me. In closed forest like that, the sound bounces off everything and you lose the direction fast. I froze, rifle down, safety on, completely still. I listened for a second shot. A clean kill doesn't always need one, but a poor hit almost always does. The animal runs, you wait, you find it, you finish it. That's the sequence. I waited 30 seconds, a full minute. Nothing. No second shot. I stood there and ran the sound back through my head. The report was wrong, too sharp, too light. Deer hunting rifles make a heavy, deep sound. You feel it as much as you hear it. This wasn't that. This was thinner, faster. The kind of sound you hear at a target range, not in deer season. Whatever that was, it wasn't someone hunting whitetail. I thought about calling out. announcing myself. That's the safe thing to do when you're not certain of another hunter's position. But the shot had sounded far off, 400 yards, maybe more, and the forest was thick between us. Yelling would have scattered every deer in the area and probably accomplished nothing. I looked down at my vest, blaze orange, fully visible. Anyone with glass on me could see exactly what I was. I decided that was enough, took a breath, started moving again. I told myself it was someone shooting at a coyote. It happens, nothing to do with me. The deer was gone by then. I'd lost it during the shot. I stood in the quiet for a moment, getting my bearings, then started working my way through a lower section of the draw toward a bench I know on the far side. That's where I found the clearing, and that's where I found the deer. It was a young doe, lying on her side in the open grass, alive, breathing. Her sides were moving in long, slow pulls. She didn't try to get up when I approached, just turned her head slightly and looked at me. I moved carefully around her and crouched to look at the injury. I expected a gunshot wound. Entry point, blood, the usual. What I found instead was damage to her right foreleg. The joint was badly lacerated, swollen, not a bullet wound. The pattern of it, the way the tissue had torn, it looked like a restraint injury. Like something had been wrapped around the leg and she'd pulled against it hard enough to damage the joint. A snare or a cable trap. I stood up and looked around. This was poaching territory now. Someone had set a trap on public state game lands, which is illegal, and the deer had gotten partially free but couldn't walk. I was now standing in the middle of someone else's operation. I called out, loudly, "Hello, hunter, I'm here." Standard practice. Let anyone in the area know you're human, you're present, you're not a target. Silence. I called again, waited. Nothing came back. The silence after you call in a forest is different from regular forest silence. Regular silence is just absence of sound. This was something heavier, like the sound was being held. I looked down at the ground around the doe, and I saw the boot prints, the same tread pattern as the ones I'd found at the creek crossing. The same loops, the same overlapping paths, concentrated here, around this animal, in a wide circle, multiple passes. Someone had been coming back to this spot regularly. I looked at the edges of those prints more carefully. They weren't fresh. Some of them had leaf debris blown into the impressions. These weren't from this morning. Deer season had opened 3 days ago. Those prints were older than 3 days. Whoever had been circling this spot had been doing it before the season started. They'd known about this place, this animal, this clearing for a while. I raised my eyes. He was standing in the tree line, 40 yards, maybe a little more, dark jacket, completely still, just inside the shadow line. No blaze orange. I went down, not a decision, just happened. Flat on the ground behind the doe, rifle pulled in close, face in the grass. I lay there and did not move. After a moment, I turned my head just enough to see through the grass. He hadn't moved, wasn't coming toward me. Just standing there, weight settled, completely relaxed, not looking at the doe, looking at the space where I'd been standing. I moved, slowly, back toward the edge of the clearing, keeping the doe's body between me and the tree line, then into the brush, then through it, low and quiet. I didn't look back. At some point I realized I couldn't hear anything behind me. No footsteps, no branches, nothing. I came up slowly, got my bearings and walked out. Steady pace, back to the access road, back to my truck. I got to my truck and left, pulled out and drove. There's a Sheetz about 14 miles down Route 144. I pulled in, parked under the canopy, and sat there with the engine running. A state trooper pulled up to the pump across from me about 10 minutes later. I watched him get out, tap his card, start filling up. I thought about it. I genuinely did. But I ran through what I was going to say, that I saw a man standing in the woods, no orange vest, and he looked at me funny. That's it. That's the whole thing. No shot fired at me, no threat, no confrontation. Just a guy standing in the trees on public land during hunting season. The trooper would have written something down, and that would have been the end of it. And part of me, the part that's been hunting that area for 11 years, didn't want my name attached to a report about something I couldn't even describe. He finished filling up and drove off. I didn't move. I still think about it. I don't know what he was doing out there. I don't know what I walked into. I don't know if that's the whole story or just the part I was there for. It was the summer before my junior year. Me, Danny, Tyler, and Corey had been talking about doing a real camping trip for months, not the kind with flush toilets and a parking lot full of minivans. A real one. No facilities, no neighbors, just trees. I've thought about that phrase a lot since then. Just trees. Like the absence of people was the whole point. I didn't understand yet that it cut both ways. We found the spot on some outdoor forum, a clearing off a Forest Service road somewhere in the Appalachians. The post was old, barely any replies. Someone had described it as isolated, easy drive, good flat ground. That was enough for us. We loaded up Danny's Jeep, the older one, the one with the cracked dashboard he'd had since high school, threw in a cooler, 3 tents, and enough food for 3 nights. Corey brought a portable speaker. Tyler brought a Nalgene full of something that wasn't water. We were 20, 21. It felt like the right thing to do. Corey had been doing this thing for weeks where he'd bring up some story he'd read on this same forum where we found the spot. Some group of guys went out to a place just like this, found the location online just like us. Never came back. He told it like it was fact. Completely straight-faced every time. Nobody bought it. The story had that quality. Vague enough that it could have been made up by a bored teenager. We told him that. He got defensive. We laughed. That was Corey. By the time we pulled off onto the service road, he'd told it twice. Tyler told him if he mentioned it again, he was walking home. We found the clearing around 4 in the afternoon. Flat, open, ringed by trees, a dried-up creek bed along one edge. No other cars, no fire rings, no sign anyone had been there recently. We started unloading, and that's when Danny noticed it. At the base of a tree just off the clearing, a rope, neatly coiled, not dropped, not tangled, coiled and set down like someone had placed it there and planned to come back. Corey opened his mouth. Tyler said, "It's a rope, Corey. People leave gear." Done. I don't know why I remember exactly how it was coiled. I just do. We found the spot on a public forum. Other people had camped here before. Someone left a rope. I remember glancing at it for a second. The way it was coiled, tight and even, and then I turned around and helped Danny with the tents. We got set up before dark, built a fire, opened the cooler. Tyler's Nalgene made a few rounds. At some point, Danny nodded toward the trees on the far side of the clearing and said he could see a light out there. Way out, maybe half a mile. A small orange flicker, another fire probably. Corey started to say something. Nobody responded. We watched it for a few seconds and then Corey started talking about something else and we moved on. It was maybe an hour later when the mood shifted. Corey had been slowly working everyone back toward that original story, not directly, just circling around it. The fire was lower, it was properly dark out. Then something came out of the bushes, Corey, arms out, screaming. Danny spilled his drink. I went backward off my log. Tyler woke up swinging. 4 full seconds of pure chaos. Then we figured out what happened and it turned into something else. Corey had planned the whole thing, the whole evening of build-up just for that reaction. He was losing it, laughing. Danny threw something at him. Tyler said something I won't repeat here. We came down from it eventually. Stayed up another hour or so, then called it. Tyler and I shared a tent. He was out in minutes. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. Late. The kind of late where the air gets that heavy cold to it a few hours before dawn. I don't remember dreaming. I was just awake. I lay there and listened. There's a sound a forest makes at night. Wind, branches, things moving through the underbrush. You stop hearing it after a while. This was something underneath that. Something that didn't fit. Someone was humming. Low, male, barely any volume. The kind of sound that leaks out when someone's not thinking about it. A simple tune. 4 or 5 notes. Repeating. My first thought was Corey. No hesitation. He'd spent the whole night setting up a bit. Of course he wasn't done. So I didn't move. I just waited for him to get bored. The humming kept going. Then footsteps. Slow. No rush to them. Moving around the outside of the tent. A twig snapped. Then another. Then the humming stopped. And then I felt it before I saw it. Not fear exactly. More like the specific feeling of being looked at, the kind you only recognize once it's too late to be useful. And on the side of the tent, lit up, faint by whatever moonlight was coming through. A shadow, the shape of a person, moving along the outside of the fabric, not fast, just walking, like he had somewhere to be. I watched the shadow, still thinking, Corey. This is Corey, don't react, just cut off. That's what got me, not the sound, the way it stopped. Like whoever was making it had made up their mind about something. I unzipped the tent and pushed out fast. Caught the guy rope with my foot on the way out. The whole side of the tent behind me dropped. I didn't stop to look at it. He was at the far edge of the tent. I could see his shape, tall, heavy jacket, not moving toward me, not moving at all. Just standing there the way you stand somewhere you belong. I don't know how many seconds went by, not many. I said something. My voice came out louder than I meant it to, cracked somewhere in the middle. He stepped back and his foot caught something on the ground and he went down. Hit the metal cookpots we'd left stacked near the fire ring. The sound was huge. A crash, then clattering, then nothing. I was yelling. Lights in the other tents. Zippers. Voices. By the time Danny got out, maybe 7-8 seconds, there was no one there. Just the dark tree line and the cookpot on its side in the dirt. I told them what I saw. The shape, the jacket, the way he'd just been standing there. Corey didn't say anything for a while, which was noticeable. The general theory, I'd pranked them back. Set the whole thing up, tipped the pot myself. That was what everyone landed on. Danny had a flashlight. He swept it around the back of the tent just to shut me up, I think. That's when we saw them. Footprints in the soft dirt, coming from the tree line and stopping right where he'd been standing. Just stopping. No return track, no second set going back. Tyler looked at them for a long time, didn't say anything. Nobody did. We didn't go back to sleep after that. We just sat there, talking it through, going in circles. And somewhere in all of that, it started getting light, that gray kind of light that comes before the sun actually shows up. I stood up and started rolling up my sleeping bag. Nobody told me to stop. Nobody said we had another day planned. Tyler started on his side of the tent. The far side was still up, but our side had been down since I kicked the guy rope out. We just folded it over and stuffed the whole thing into the bag without really looking at it. Corey and Danny broke down their tents. We loaded everything into the Jeep. We were back on the main road before 10, home by early afternoon. About a week later, Tyler texted me. He'd been meaning to set up his tent in the backyard for his little sister. She'd been asking about it for a while. He pulled it out of the bag and laid it flat on the grass to check it over before putting it together. Spread the panels out. That's when he saw it. On the rear panel. At exactly the height where my head had been. A handprint. Full palm, 4 fingers. Pressed into the fabric from the outside. Dirty. Clear. He sent the photo and then he sent one line. I believe you. I've looked at that photo more times than I can count. Tyler saw one print, that's what he texted, but there are 2. The second one is fainter, a few inches to the left of the first. Same hand, like he moved it, I don't know what he was looking for.